We're turning to Mark chapter 5 this morning. Let me just make a link of some kind between what's gone before, and Mark does this. He connects his thoughts together very logically. What we see in the previous verses is Jesus with power over the chaos of the natural world. And in this passage, we see Jesus with power over the chaos, but it's not the natural world, it's the chaos of the spiritual world. And I think perhaps that's the connection. But whatever that in the intentions of the narrative, we come this morning to what is often referred to as the deliverance of the demoniac of Gadara. I will call it something else. When Jesus gets asked to leave. Because that's ultimately where this ends up. Where instead of welcoming and embracing Jesus, they're sending him away. They're filled with nervous, fearful, anxious thoughts, and they don't want anything to do with him. Get him away from me. Send him away. And that's where this wonderful miracle ends up. I'll divide it up into three parts as we go through the story this morning. A tormented man, an encounter with Jesus, and a costly deliverance. And when we come to the costly deliverance, I'll explain what this is all about with the pigs and explain what we shouldn't be thinking and what we should about that. But first of all, we have Mark's description, and other Gospels, Matthew and Luke, also describe the tormented state of a man who, living in the tombs, living among the graves, often found on the mountains, and if you pass by that way, you better look out. Matthew tells us this. Nobody was able to go near him. They all avoided that area because they could hear these deathly cries from the mountains. There he could be seen, blood-soaked as he's cutting himself with stones. He's in utter torment, utter agony of spirit. He has his entire sanity is gone. He is, in effect, to the locals, a madman, whether they attributed anything spiritual to it or not. Not once in all of the three records, Matthew, Luke, and Mark, not once is ever any blame left upon him. There's no moral judgment passed that he's done A, B, and C, and this is why he's ended up in this state. But rather that here is a graphic description of someone who has lost his mind and lost his sanity. We might say a madman, or at least indistinguishable from a madman. Though there are some distinguishing factors, because it clearly says that he is possessed with an evil spirit. It reminds me, years ago we had a gentleman, part of our church, who was the head nurse in the A&E in Milton Keynes. And he had two patients in one day, and the doctors diagnosed them with precisely the same psychological condition. But they presented very differently. And the psychological condition of various doctors' assessments was all that they could offer. But one of the men stood in the middle of the whole of the ward area in the A&E, making various animal noises, grabbing at things, cutting himself, screaming, barking like a dog, howling like a monkey, and he seemed to have the strength of 10 men. It took 6 policemen to subdue him. He was so violent with rage, and it seemed observable, in some measure at least, that there was something different about this man to the other man even though the doctors could only diagnose them with the same condition. Because there is a spiritual realm, and I think that's what Mark's showing us and exposing to us, that Jesus has come to deal with, that is attacking and contributing to the misery of mankind. And so night and day this man is in the tombs, he's cutting himself, and he's crying out of misery. And when Jesus comes, he's seen running down the mountainside, and it isn't to worship him. Not at that point. But then we have this encounter with Jesus. And it seems as soon as he enters into the presence of Jesus, everything changes. As soon as Jesus steps onto the shore, it says in our translation, he worshipped him. Better to translate it more literally, he fell down before him. And he fell down. And what he said is fascinating, because there is in these evil spirits an immediate submissiveness and recognition of the authority of the one standing before him. Now that's interesting, because the disciples don't yet see that. Chapter 4 ends, what manner of man is this? Who is this? That even the winds and the waves obey him. Who is Jesus? Is he just the carpenter from Nazareth, the son of Joseph and Mary? There seems to be something unique, special, powerful about him, wise about him, but who is he? And that's what Mark's gradually showing us. He shows us it from the first verse, and like readers, we come along the journey with him as people are discovering who he is. And I'm sure that this instance was indelibly marked on the memories of the disciples. Do you remember when, and what they would have said was, do you remember when 2,000 pigs ran down a hillside? And they would remember that. It's an object lesson. But we'll come back to that. Here, in this encounter with Jesus, the devils say three interesting things. And the first is, what have I to do with thee? Now that is an idiom. If it were literally translated, it would be, what to me and to you? And it isn't a polite thing. It's more like, what do you want? You know, you wouldn't answer the phone like that. You pick up the phone, what do you want? It's more like that. It's, what business have you got here? Why have you come? And some people, there's obviously hostility there, but some people are like that, particularly when it comes to thinking about God and thinking about Jesus Christ. But then he says, what have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? And he knew. The devils knew. Because Jesus had entered this world from the spiritual realm, and so had they. And so they at once recognized, they at once saw the King of glory, the one of majesty, the one of authority, the eternal Word made flesh, and they recognize him and they bow down, thou Son of the Most High God. And then they say, I adjure you, which is charge you, make you solemnly swear, do not torment me. Now I find that interesting on this level at least, that they were quite happy to torment this man, but they didn't want to be tormented. And whenever you come across this, even in people, recognize it as evil, that someone is quite happy to do something, treat others in a certain way, but they wouldn't want to be treated like that themselves. It reminds me of Jesus' golden rule, and the golden rule is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So they did not want to be tormented, even though they were quite happy to continue tormenting this man. But something more is in their words. particularly this comes out in the other Gospels where it's, don't torment me ahead of the time. And what they think is, Jesus, the Son of God, has come, and is it the time or is it ahead of the time? What they mean is there is coming a reckoning, there is coming an eternal judgment, and at that season the powers of the wicked will be utterly defeated and destroyed. They know this. They know their time is short, and so that's what's at play. They fear the judgment to come. And they don't want to be in this disembodied state. They don't want to be, to lose their influence. Here it's translated, don't send me out of this country. And they don't want, they've found a foothold. They found a place where they are terrifying people, and they are tormenting this man, and they are delighted by the results of their efforts, and they are engaged in this realm of darkness, this fight against the humanity of man, and oppression, and this spirit of darkness, and they don't want to lose that foothold, that power, that influence that they have found. But Jesus says in simple, authoritative, powerful words, come out of him. No ritual, no ceremony, just the command of a king that must be obeyed. Come out of him. Leave him alone. A tormented man, an encounter with Jesus, and here's where the passage gets really interesting. A costly deliverance. Now the devils seek Jesus' permission when they realize they've got to leave the man. They seek Jesus' permission to enter a nearby, on an opposing hillside, a nearby herd of pigs. There's about 2,000 of them. Jesus asks the man his name, and it is the devils that reply, our name is Legion, for we are many. And of course that fits with the 2,000 pigs. A legion of Roman soldiers was about 5,000 to 6,000. And so there is a cooperation of wickedness at play here. And so they ask permission to enter the pigs, and that perhaps asks more questions of us. Why? Why do they want to enter the pigs? And the second question, why did Jesus allow it? And I'm going to answer those two questions, and I think this is the heart of the message this morning and what God has to say to us from this passage. And the first is, why did they want to go into the pigs? Well, it was fitting, wasn't it? In Jewish law, the pigs were unclean animals and they were unclean spirits. Now, pigs do not have the rational mind and the living soul that man has. But nonetheless, that we do see through the Bible a correlation between the animal world and the spiritual world, as God often speaks even through animals. And so, as other living creatures, they don't want to be disembodied. So it is fitting, because pigs are unclean animals and they are unclean spirits, but it's more than that, it's revealing. And as they enter the pigs, and they dramatically and immediately charge down the hill into the sea and drown, it is revealing of the effects of evil upon life. They are destructive, they bring death, and Jesus has come to bring life. And so it is fitting, because they're unclean animals. It's revealing, because it shows graphically what evil spirits lead to, destruction and death. And it's foreshadowing. Because, now, you'd have to look at the Greek for this, and you'd have to look particularly at Matthew's gospel, but they ask, don't send us into the abyss. And when Mark translates this, he says, they fell down into the abyss. And that's not a coincidence. It's the sea, literally, but that's not a coincidence. That they end up where they didn't want to go. And it's foreshadowing of that future judgment that is coming. And Jesus isn't bringing forward the date of the judgment. He isn't bringing it ahead of time. But he is permitting these things because, well, it's fitting, and because it is revealing, and because it is foreshadowing. But there is something else in Jesus' heart. Because think about it not now from the point of view of the evil spirits, but think about it from the point of view of the owners of these pigs and of the townspeople. And then you have to it begs the question, well, why did Jesus allow it? You know, if you were a pig farmer and you owned 2,000 pigs, it wouldn't be a good thing, as far as you'd be concerned, that all of your pigs just ran down a hill and drowned in the sea. Even if you might collect their carcasses and process them in the normal way, although I wouldn't thank you for them after what they've been through, but it was a disaster. And so you have to ask the question, as Jesus comes and he is being revealed as one who is compassionate, and it says that in this passage that he has compassion on this man, because he tells them, go and tell how great things the Lord has done and how he had compassion on you. So Jesus is moved towards the situation of this man where other people just want him out the way and locked up. Because they tried to bind him, they tried to chain him up, they just want him away from them, not disturbing them. But Jesus is moved, his heart goes out to him. Now, of course, they couldn't help him. And so you might say, well, that's a reasonable thing to do, but a reasonable response to make. Let's not have him bringing his violence and destruction in our community. Let's get him out the way. But nonetheless, Jesus has the people in mind. And let me try and answer from the perspective of the devils. I've answered that. It was fitting and it was somewhat revealing and it was certainly foreshadowing. But what about from the point of view of the townsfolk? Because this is where it's all heading, this story. This glorious miracle. And the miracles always are to attest to who Jesus is. They are to authenticate the teachings that he's bringing to man, the revelation that he's giving of the way to God and of who God is. And so the miracle is meant to have an impact. It's meant to speak. It's meant to signify. And it's meant to turn people to Jesus. And so it is meant to have an impact. And so the first thing I'll say is, Jesus allowed this. It's more by permission. He didn't kill the pigs. The evil spirits brought about the destruction. But he permits it, first of all, because it's confrontational. It forced the whole town to face the reality of what has happened here. They couldn't ignore it. One man on his own might have been forgotten about quickly, but it wasn't news spread all over the town, because that's how it happened. The people who were looking after the pigs, who fed the pigs, they ran back to the owners, and the owners start spreading, and the grapevine in those days was not on social media or on the TV, it was word of mouth, and so the grapevine spreads the news, and sooner rather than later, the whole town is out to see what's going on. And so Jesus allows it because it brings him face to face with the people, and it presents to the people something else. It's not just confrontational. It's revealing. It makes known. And it exposes to them, they are forced to consider quite a number of things. Because, for a start, how precious in the eyes of God is a soul? Worth 2,000 pigs? They wrote the man off. They wanted to neatly put him away and just get on with their lives. But throughout Scripture, the Lord maintains that every soul, even the most, let us use the term totally advisedly, God-forsaken of souls, is precious in his eyes. That's the heart of God. And Jesus is exposing that by allowing this economic disruption and loss. And he's making them face up to that. And then also, as they see the man sitting there now, and we have this lovely simplistic description of what he was like before and then what he was like after. He was clothed and in his right mind. And that just says it all. Because he was naked before and now he's clothed. And he was insane before and now he's in his right mind. And this had happened to him later in life because Jesus sends him back to his friends and his family, his loved ones. So here is a man that they knew, and he's been transformed. And they are facing up to that. They encounter that and they have to face up to it as a result of what Jesus allowed. You know, God might allow things in your life that seem mysterious, but let me tell you, he always has a wise plan in what he is doing. And I hope we can begin to see that here. It confronts the people, and then it exposes to them or reveals to them the cost and value, the preciousness of a soul. It reveals to them this transformation of a man now calm and together and sane and comforted and more than that, happy. His joy has come back to him. His peace is being found. He's no longer agitated and disturbed like the troubled sea. But then, and here's the main point, it reveals to them or makes them face up to who Jesus is. Who is this man that has come among us, that values a soul more than 2,000 pigs? Who is this one? We couldn't tame him. We put iron fetters on him and they were broken. We wrapped him in chains and they were broken. We wanted rid of him and this man came along and saved him, had compassion on him. We couldn't do anything for him, not our wise men or our doctors. Nobody could help him. But this man has brought him deliverance and set him completely free. Who is this man? It brought them face to face with who Jesus was. That's why it was allowed. That's why it was permitted. It isn't that Jesus was judging. This has often been a misunderstanding of the passage. Jesus was judging them for keeping pigs because pigs were condemned by the Jews. Nothing of the sort. It's Jesus was confronting them, exposing to them the preciousness of this man. But also, they saw consequently the evidence that this is what destruction and evil causes and brings, death. But more than that, as they see the man now in his right mind, and as they see Jesus, they're confronted with this revelation and this question, what will they do with Jesus? Sometimes the Lord works in patterns. And what he does before, he does again. And I put it to you that God is still doing exactly what he's doing in this chapter. He saves people. He has compassion on people, perhaps that others have written off. Perhaps people who are tormented and have found themselves in the place, not necessarily demon-possessed like this man, but found themselves in a place of torment and agony. People who have nothing better than to do than to cry and to hurt themselves. And they're clearly in torments, and Jesus comes along and he sets those people free, and he saves them, and he delivers them. And it can be that he delivers people that don't have these obvious signs, these outward demonstrations of an inward turmoil. But he saves them nonetheless, and he sets them free, and then he sets them before the world and says, this is what my power can do. And it's one of your friends, one of your relatives, someone that you encounter, someone that you know, and you see that visible transformation in them. And what does it lead you to conclude? Well, who is this Jesus? And what are we going to do with him? Now, sadly, the conclusion to this story is this. They send Jesus away. We don't want anything to do with this. It was disturbing and it was scary. And if this man has such power, it seemed lost on them that this power was able to save, because all they have is the example of their leaders. And if someone has great power, then they can oppress you and they can do evil things. And so they're afraid. And the story ends with them asking Jesus to leave. How sad. It wasn't that they hadn't got, they had a lack of evidence. They had clear evidence. But they didn't want their lives disturbed. They were afraid of his power. And so they bid him go. But that isn't the end. Because even though Jesus accepts, even though Jesus graciously respects their request, and he departs, he doesn't stand there preaching a theological sermon, haranguing them over their evil and their wickedness. He doesn't do that. He leaves. He gets in the boat to leave. The man sees him to the shore. And then as he starts to go into the boat and Jesus stops him, the man says, let me come with you. Let me be with you. Because they've rejected you. Let me be with you. Because this man now sees who Jesus is too. He's his Savior. He's his deliverer. He's his friend. He's the Almighty. He's the Messiah. And so he wants to go with him. And Jesus says no. Because even though I'm leaving, it doesn't mean that my witness will leave. Go back. And this is what you're to do. And Jesus doesn't send him back to preach sermons. He just said, go and tell them. Tell everyone the great things that I've done for you and how I had compassion on you. Go and tell them about my power and my grace. And Christians have been telling people about Jesus' power and his grace ever since, as lives have been transformed. And many still confronted, like the people of the town. They see lives transformed, but they're afraid of what change might look like. It isn't that they don't have the evidence, they're just keeping Jesus at a distance. And yet still God graciously leaves a witness. And he carries on speaking. And that witness, through his friend, his servant, this man, and all the name we have is Legion, spreads and spreads and spreads until the whole of that region of Decapolis, it's a region, and by the way, sometimes it's the demoniac of Gadara, and then other times you'll read about the Gerasenes, and so you can look into that yourselves as to, well, where did this take place? It's not strictly relevant, but there's a whole area called Decapolis. And this man spreads the good news about Jesus throughout this whole area. The question that we should take away, this is Mark's, I think, tension here. The thrust of what he has to reveal to us about Jesus as he's introducing Jesus to us is that sometimes we can get so scared and so afraid that we lose sight of the obvious. Jesus is full of compassion. He is both almighty to save and has sufficient grace to save you. Often people, when they think of encountering a holy God, they're terrified because he is holy and they're not. And we all can relate to that and know that we fall short. But Jesus comes and reveals not just almighty power, but almighty grace. And that's on full display. So, what will you do with Jesus? Will you send him away? Or will you welcome him? May the Lord speak to us through his word this morning. Amen.